How many pilots has your health system run in the last 2 years? How many of them are in active clinical use today? Yep, that's the problem. It has nothing to do with whether your AI tool works. A CMIO at University of Toledo Health just broke down why clinical AI stalls between pilot and scale and the cascade model that they use to fix it. I used to be a family caregiver. Every system that I had to work with had its own interface. Every physician had their own workflow. The tools that were supposed to make things easier, the portals, the scheduling platforms, and care coordination apps, were almost universally adopted by the institution and ignored by the people who were actually using them. Someone built those tools. Someone sold them. Someone bought them. And no one asked the people who work there whether they fit. And that's what this video is about. Not whether clinical AI works in controlled conditions, but whether it survives contact with real clinical environments. I came across a HIMSS interview with Dr. Ryan Sadigan, CMIO and former Chief AI Officer at University of Toledo Health, and what he laid out is the clearest framework that I've heard on how health systems get clinical AI from pilot to scale. Let me share what Ryan said about why physicians resist clinical AI before we get to the framework. He said, the biggest misconception is that physicians resist AI because they dislike technology. Most physicians resist tools that interrupt their workflow, create liability concerns, or add work without obvious value, which I talked about here. Resistance is often not an anti-AI thing. It's feedback that the tool has not been designed around clinical reality. So don't think of physicians as your obstacle. They're your product review. When they push back on a tool, they're telling you something specific. This interrupts my day, this creates ambiguity about who's responsible, this generates output that I can't quickly verify. Those are not cultural objections, they're design requirements. The second problem is structural. Ryan calls it the strategy to frontline gap. AI strategies get built at the executive or technology level, but adoption happens at the physician, nursing, and operational level. There's almost always a difference between what leadership thinks the tool will do and what the frontline experiences when the tool is deployed. I watched this with my own family members' care. Every tool was purchased by someone who would never use it, and by the time it reached the people it was supposed to help, it had been configured around institutional convenience, not clinical workflow. If your pilot results are good, but expansion conversations keep stalling, you're probably hitting one of these two problems, or both. To fix it, you don't necessarily need a better sales conversation, you need a better cascade model. Let's go over it. Before we get to the cascade model, there's a diagnostic step. Ryan uses 5 questions to evaluate whether a clinical AI tool is ready to scale. And these are questions that your health system partner should be running on your tool before the expansion conversation starts. 1. Does it reduce work or add work? If your tool generates documentation a physician still has to review, edit, and sign off on, and that process takes longer than it would manually, then you don't have a tool that helps your efficiency, you have a liability generator. 2. Does it fit into the physician's existing workflow? Not a parallel workflow, not a new tab, the existing workflow. If adoption requires a behavior change before the physician sees any value, then you've set the bar too high. 3. Can the output be reviewed quickly? Clinical AI generates output that someone still has to validate. If that validation step is slow or ambiguous, the physician will stop trusting the tool, even if the underlying model is accurate. 4. Does it require context switching? Context switching is what you do when you're trying to multitask with things that require your brain power, and there's a switching cost. Moving between systems mid-patient encounter is a known driver of cognitive load and error. If your tool requires leaving the primary workflow to use it, you're competing with every other tool that also requires context switching, and that's a crowded losing field. 5. Does it create liability confusion? When AI flags a risk or suggests a decision, who's responsible if the physician acts on it and it's wrong? If your tool doesn't have a clear answer to that question, which is a big liability concern, physicians will not use it. They don't need that kind of smoke in their life, carrying risks that aren't theirs. Run these 5 questions on your tool before the next expansion conversation. And if you can't answer all 5 of them clearly, you're not ready to scale. Iterate first. Ryan described how the University of Toledo Health used clinical AI in cardiology for prior authorization and documentation, and how that single department pilot became the blueprint for health system-wide expansion. The model works in 4 steps. Step 1. Start narrow. Not narrow as in low ambition. Narrow as in surgical, precise. Cardiology prior authorization is a well-defined, high-friction problem. The workflow is repetitive. The output is measurable. The physicians doing it will notice immediately if the tool helps or hurts. That specificity is not a limitation, it's the feature. When you start narrow, you learn fast, you attribute outcomes clearly, and you're not trying to prove everything at once. Step 2. Build from the front line up. The physicians who used the tool in the pilot became the champions for the next phase. Those are the people that used it, not executive sponsors, not department heads who observed the pilot. Ryan is very direct about this. Physician champions have to come from the front line because that is where the credibility lives. An executive who's telling a cardiologist that AI works doesn't move the needle. One cardiologist telling another cardiologist does. Step 3, prove ROI before expanding. 2 to 3 months. It's not 2 to 3 years. Ryan puts it plainly that if you can't measure value, you should question whether the tool should scale at all. And measurable means something your health system partner can present to a CFO. Not some satisfaction survey, but real outcomes. Step 4, govern the expansion. When you move from one department to 3 service lines, governance is what's going to make or break it. Who monitors the model's outputs? Who owns validation? Who will handle the edge cases that the training data didn't cover? These 3 sample questions are not theoretical. They make the difference between clinical capability and a liability. That's the cascade. Narrow pilot to frontline champions, to measured ROI, to governed expansion. It sounds simple because the logic is simple. Most organizations will skip steps 2 and 3 and then wonder why the 4th step fails. Let me share how Ryan closed this webinar because it is the clearest reframe that I've ever heard about what the finish line looks like in clinical AI. Scaling AI is not about having more pilots, it's about turning the right pilots into governed, measured, and adopted clinical capability. And slightly earlier, he also said, success is not just going live. Success is when physicians use the tools because it makes their day better. When you put these 2 statements together, it dismantles something that costs health tech companies real contracts. The metric most teams are using, go live date, pilot completion, signed implementation agreement, those are the wrong metrics. It's like measuring the starting gun and not the finish line. When a health system goes live with your tool, you haven't won yet. You've earned the right to prove it. Every physician who finds the tool harder than doing their own work manually is a data point. Every physician who stops using it after 2 weeks is a data point. Those aren't adoption failures, it's just feedback. You have to collect it and respond to it or else you won't scale. You might survive until the next conversation about a contract renewal, but you won't scale. Scaling clinical AI means you've turned a pilot into something a health system runs on, measures, and depends on. And that's a different goal that requires a different plan. Drop a comment below. What slowed down a clinical AI expansion that you've been a part of? Is it the frontline adoption gap, governance, or something else? If you realize that your onboarding or implementation processes don't have a framework for any of this, then check out the 5-day onboarding optimization challenge. It's a free email course where you'll actually rewrite your welcome email using my frameworks: the patient psychology framework, the ongoing value approach, and personalization strategies that help combat generic messaging. By day 5, you'll have your first onboarding email rewritten and a blueprint for the last 4 days in your sequence. This is perfect for product leaders, customer success heads, and founders who need to fix their onboarding before the next contract renewal conversation. Health tech leaders are pushing for AI that moves from prediction to action instead of just generating more data points for humans to process. And yes, I know what you're thinking. There's regulatory issues, liability concerns, and clinical judgment requirements. That's absolutely true. But that means you need to design your AI to handle those constraints up front, not dump them onto your already overwhelmed clinical users. And here's a bonus question that you should ask about liability. If the AI recommends something and you don't follow it, are you liable? If you do follow it and